Hey, Cathy, welcome to the show.
Hey, happy to be here.
I really appreciate you coming. I am going to say I'm geeked about the fact that you've decided to have this conversation. You have, so one, your interest in the metaverse, that's what originally got me to reach out, but your experience with brands that have been doing this for a long time, HTC.
Mhm.
You've done work with Mozilla, you've done work with Amazon AWS, Magic Leap. I mean, that's crazy. Do you mind taking us a step back and kind of giving us that journey for yourself?
Yeah, so I've been in the augmented reality, virtual reality industry for close to 6 years right now, actually. And yeah, I mean, I've worked with some of the biggest names in that industry, including HTC Vive. Worked with Magic Leap as well, which was a really interesting experience. Amazon Web Services. And along the way, I've also done work with many different brands in the space. Like, I've done some things with Microsoft, done some things, with AT&T. So yeah, just a lot of different work along the way, in this kind of immersive world and future that we're heading into.
So I remember back when the movie Lawnmower Man came out, and
Yeah.
everybody's like, "Hey, it's right around the corner," which wasn't the case. What got you? What were the sort of connecting dots that got you 6 years ago into this space?
Yeah, and first of all, big shout out to my friend Brett Leonard, who's the director of Lawnmower Man. He's great. He's fantastic. I kind of really have to take it back to like way back to 2004. I At the time I was living in Atlanta, kind of where you're located, and I was living in Atlanta. I was at that time, had my my dream job, let's call it, at CNN. Part of that job, not the whole thing, but part of that job was to look at all the raw footage that was coming in from the war in Iraq. I had to sit through really horrible and traumatizing things, right? I always joke that I was a Facebook moderator or a YouTube moderator before there was Facebook or YouTube, because of the kinds of things I had to kind of look at. So when you have that type of role, you have that type of job, you have to turn your humanity switch off just a little bit, or turn the dial, or just to kind of get by and get home and have a normal life. After a while, I left CNN. Fast forward to about 6 years ago, when I went to a conference and got invited to put a virtual reality headset on my head for the first time. And I went into an experience called Confinement by The Guardian. And that experience puts you in a solitary confinement cell, a very small space, where prisoners spend about 90% of their time. And, I was in there, I felt claustrophobic, my heart palpitations, but something also happened. Something changed. I felt, and the only way I can explain it is I felt like that switch got turned back on, like the whatever it was, the dial that I had to kind of like lower when I had that role, and the trauma from it. I felt like I was fully able to turn it back on in some way. So I took the headset off and I said, wow, this is the future of storytelling on some level I don't even know. And this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So did a very hard pivot 6 years ago into technology, into hard tech, into AR and VR. And it's been onward and upward in that sense. And I'm kind of now going further into the metaverse.
How did you, so when you decided to take that first step after regaining some of that
Mhm.
humanity that you had to shut down, what was your first foray into it? And then what were some of the
Yeah.
steps that led you to the present moment?
Yeah, so I always call it my first big break. My first big break in VR was I got hired to be the chief communications officer for a small startup VR studio. We did cinematic VR. It was called Future Lighthouse. We did cutting edge, really ahead of its time VR content. I mean, we worked with companies like Sony Pictures and Oculus, and all sorts of different, big names. We even had two experiences that debuted at the Island of VR in Venice. So Venice Film Festival has an island with VR on it, and the first year that it happened, we actually had two experiences there. So that was pretty exciting. Unfortunately, like many studios, around one of those hype cycles in the VR world. We weren't able to raise more funds despite having amazing content, and that studio shut down. So that was, a bit of a heartbreak. But lots of great people came from that studio, and I learned a lot. We did everything from branded pieces that got awarded in Tribeca to cinematic horror with Robert Englund, Mr. Freddy Krueger. So
that's cool.
I learned a lot, and it was a great experience.
And so we learn and we iterate as we grow, and we figure out the path. Mm-hmm. What is it now that you're currently working on that's exciting you?
It's all metaverse related. I feel like I'm straddling two different worlds, my AR VR world, because that is where I come from, but also more of this metaverse world where it's about web 3.0, and it's about non-fungible tokens, and it's about so many other, virtual worlds and avatars, and kind of a bigger and broader conversation. So I'm kind of straddling both worlds right now. And that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited. I've always been excited about the future. I am a futurist. So yeah, it's just an exciting time to be alive, to be honest.
When you're talking to the uninitiated, you hit on two really big terms right now: metaverse and the NFTs, non-fungible tokens. When you're having a conversation, how do you define those terms to people in a way that connects with them?
Yeah. So easiest way to explain kind of where we're heading, let's say, is Web 1.0, connected information, right? The internet, you're able to find information. Web 2.0, connected people. So you got social media and everything that came with that. And then Web 3.0 connects people, places, and things. And this is where it gets interesting, because when you think the term metaverse, there's many definitions. Neil Stevenson, who I had the pleasure of working with at Magic Leap, he was our chief futurist. He's the person that first coined the term, I believe. And in that case, it was a virtual shared spaces, et cetera. I think it's, the definition that was about 30 years ago. So the definition has definitely morphed, right? Because technology has changed. I personally really like what Kevin Kelly from Wired says, and how he describes it when he talks about the mirror world or the metaverse. It's kind of when the world becomes machine readable, likable, searchable. We're probably going to access that through some type of wearable, probably glasses. Snapchat showed off their augmented reality glasses yesterday. And we know Facebook, we know Apple, we know all these companies are coming to market with something as well. So it's really kind of, the metaverse could be anything from a fully virtual space, virtual shared space, or virtual world that you go into. So people tend to think Ready Player One, right? They immediately tend to think Ready Player One. And I always wonder, I was like, why do they think Ready Player One and they don't think Pokemon Go? Why does it always have to be over here? And I think that the metaverse is broader than just Ready Player One, right? It's really kind of, a mirror, like it could be a real world that you're engaging with through a wearable, where you see digital content in front of you, where there's all these layers of data that you can see through your glasses. But you could also go into this fully virtual space as well. So it's kind of like really, I don't know. It's a really exciting. It's a broad term. Anyone that is interest is piqued by what I'm saying, definitely check out an article I wrote for Forbes on defining the metaverse, because I don't think one person or one single company should define it. I think that we're all building it right now. So yeah, it is about shared spaces that could be virtual, or that could be our reality with digital content on it.
Yeah, I definitely see we need more content that gives people a way to connect to it, because the Minority Report is often used to think about digital overlays, but that's such a negative connotation. Some of it's cool in a sense, but the overall movie gives you that sense of dread. Or people think about Big Brother, but having a digital overlay, starting to see it in cars with the augmented reality, and it's showing you where to go, or Google Maps on your phone, and you get that. But being able to have that information accessed anytime, anywhere, that's fascinating. So you currently now you're working with big brands to help them understand what's going on in this space. Is that correct?
That is correct.
What do those conversations look like? I'm sure it's dependent on upon the person and the company and the market, but in general, to help them understand what's possible, what's currently happening, and what they could do to think about for their brand. What does that look like?
Yeah, I think it depends, like you said, on the brand. It depends. Normally, the people that do reach out to me, and most of this is people, brands reaching out to me. It's all inbound, which is great for me, But what I would say is, a lot of conversations, people very interested. Usually, it's someone that's an innovator or futurist inside the org. They might not have the title futurist, but definitely kind of look at the long game. They reach out. So, for example, and I can't really share the name of the brand, but it was a global luxury fashion brand. They reached out to me. I helped them with my team do a lot of futures research, analysis of virtual goods, virtual worlds, non-fungible tokens, and kind of set up the fundamentals, right, for where they take their strategy. So kind of a primer on what is currently happening, a primer on what's eventually potentially going to happen. And then also, how do you start setting up this strategy? That's kind of with one client. Another client, it was more like they knew they wanted to do non-fungible tokens because they're a very, very high-end luxury fashion brand. And, they have their pieces are almost like legacy pieces, right? Things that people pass on from generation to generation. So, they knew non-fungible tokens is what they wanted to do. So in that case, went all in on, okay, how do we do it? What is the collection that we're releasing, et cetera? And that's coming in the next couple of weeks. So yeah, I mean, it really depends. It could be also, education, insight, everything from sitting down and figuring out the strategy. Yeah, I mean, I've had all kinds of really interesting conversations, I have to say.
So what are non-fungible tokens? The NFTs,
Yeah.
they're like the last 60 days. We're just seeing it everywhere online. Yeah. What's that about?
Yeah. So basically, if you, and easiest way to explain it, you have a dollar, I have a dollar, and we exchange that dollar, it's an equal exchange, right? The dollar is worth the same everywhere. It's $1. But that's a fungible token, or fungible, it's fungible. When it's non-fungible, it means that, for example, you might have a Babe Ruth baseball card, trading card. I might have a Babe Ruth, trading baseball card, but they might be different years. They might be in different conditions. There might be different things about it. So, we can't really exchange one-to-one. It's not a one-to-one exchange, right? So that's what non-fungibility means. It means that it's not one-to-one, and it's also, the value is also, assigned in some ways by the owner. And it also allows you to trace the ownership of that asset. So yeah, it's a really interesting perspective, because for me, non-fungible tokens, I'm not a blockchain expert. That's not what I do, but I understand very well why non-fungible tokens work and why they matter in this metaverse. Because at the end of the day, what non-fungible tokens really allow us to do is to have ownership of digital assets, right? And then this convergence of the physical and the real that we're heading into with the metaverse, we're going to need those vehicles and those ways to be able to verify digital ownership in some ways. So the NFTs are allowing us to do that. So while, NFTs is something people are reading about and it's a little frothy, the market is a little frothy, it's bigger than that. It's not just about someone buying, people's everydays for $69 million, which was great for Mike, but it's more about, digital ownership, right? We as humans like to, ownership is important to us. It's been, very important to us for a very long time. So, one of the easiest things I tell people is, like, I grew up in Latin America, and, we learned about cocoa, like cacao, right? The plant, the fruit and the plant where actually chocolate comes from. And the beans of the cacao plant used to be a currency back in the day. And people would exchange these beans, for food, even for people. It was, pretty bad in that sense. But it wasn't one-to-one. It wasn't like you get a cacao bean, I get one cacao bean. No, they could be, I'll give you X amount of cacao beans for this piece of gold, right? So once again, it's that idea. I almost see the NFTs as the cacao beans of today in some ways, to help set up that digital ownership in this, convergence of physical and digital that we're going into.
So it sounds like scarcity is going to be a part of, and it's interesting. So for the brief history of the internet, one of the beautiful things has been how it's replicable, right? We get the one-to-many concept. And now we're finding a way to increase status by being able to point to ownership. And even though something is still infinitely copyable, if you have something that is locked into the blockchain or minted on the blockchain that shows my status, then that helps it increase in value.
Yeah.
How do you see this working for physical brands? So say take that physical luxury retailer. What would that look like?
Yeah, well, in their case, they're very lucky because they can sell their assets. Their assets sell for a lot of, tens of thousands of dollars, right? So they already have that, they're already pretty scarce, pretty unique, right? So doing an NFT for them made sense in the sense that they can attract maybe newer customers. There can be an NFT attached to the sale of these items to lead to, future ownership. It allows them to also have continued royalties when some of these items are sold in in second marketplaces. So yeah, it's quite interesting. Yeah, I mean, it's really about scarcity, but it's also about ownership. It's about traceability, because what you trade is viewable, right? If someone kind of knew my wallet, they could see what I own, what are my collectibles, what do I currently own. So it's also about knowing who owns what, right? And it's and even it's interesting because I was having a conversation with a virtual real estate company that virtual real estate property company that I'm going to be kind of doing some work with. And I have to actually sell the real estate that I own in that virtual game, because it cannot be seen like me having insider information or a conflict of interest. And that makes total sense to me, right? Because it's viewable. It's a public ledger, right? It's viewable. People that can find me would be able to see that I own property in this specific metaverse. So I can't, if I go in and do some work with them, I can't have I can't have an advantage over that. So yeah, I mean, I'm selling some of my virtual real estate, which is kind of funny, but it's for that reason, because it is public and people can see what you own.
So two questions are coming up. So first one, what is the value of virtual real estate? Why would I want to invest in something like that?
So I'll start with this. So Cathie Wood's ARK Invest put some data out beginning of this year, I believe. And this was before the NFT craze, which, is interesting. They said, that by 2030, I think it's by 2030, no, by 2050, I can't remember the number right now, but in the next couple of 5 to 10 years, the virtual goods market is going to be worth over almost $400 billion. And virtual goods could be anything from a sword in Minecraft to a Burberry skin in League of Legends, or it could be an NFT, right? That data was pre-NFT craziness, so probably a bigger number. But with these virtual properties, it's the idea of expanding the brand into a virtual world. It's the idea of building, on top of some of that virtual real estate. What are you going to build? If you build a space and someone wants to lease that space to have a virtual coffee shop, you can, charge rent, or if you sell something on that virtual real estate. And while people are like, that sounds crazy, I'm like, no, not really. There's already people making money in casinos in some of these virtual worlds. There's already children making, hundreds or thousands of dollars every month creating skins in Roblox. If you're a parent, you are definitely spending money, some of your money on Robux or V-Bucks on Fortnite and Roblox, that's for sure. So, these ideas of virtual goods and digital items, I mean, that's already happening, and there's lots of money to be made. And there's lots of money that kind of flows through those virtual worlds.
Again, going back to the status in our increasingly digital lives, the digital status matters as well. Second Life, even though that's pretty old at this point, that was also another revenue generator for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, it's still around though. I mean, I was on a panel with Philip. I'm lucky enough to know Philip, with Philip Rosedale, the creator of Second Life. He's got a different company now called High Fidelity, which is focused on immersive audio. But yeah, I mean, still focused on the metaverse, and what he did, I think, was very visionary.
Are you hearing more in the conversations that I'm having? That immersive audio concept keeps bubbling up. What are you hearing about it?
Oh my gosh. Well, you can't get a fully immersive experience if you don't focus on the audio as well. Because the audio, if you have really bad audio or audio that is not spatial, you can break the experience. At least the idea that you're truly in that virtual space. So I think audio is sometimes something that we forget about because we're very visual, right? Humans are very visual, but the audio component is incredibly important. And this is, I said this yesterday during a talk that I did. I said, whichever companies, and I want to be plural because I don't want just one, whichever companies own our eyesight, where we're going to see in front of us, and our hearing, what we're going to hear within range of our hearing, that's going to be incredibly valuable, right? That's going to be incredibly valuable. And that's kind of where we're going. Right now, I'm engaging with you on a computer, right? But eventually when we're seeing, this metaverse, all this data and information in front of you, it's like someone's going to own the airspace, right? Who owns the airspace? Who can say what gets put in front of me or what I can hear and listen to? So, yeah.
Ownership's going to be interesting in a sense. There's going to be this massive attention grab.
It could be, yeah.
We talk about metaverse, but is it really metaverses?
That's up for debate. I think there's a lot of debate in the community. There's certain people that think it's metaverses, like, obviously, Epic Games, they see themselves as a metaverse. Roblox uses the term metaverse as well. Maybe it's more a question, is it the greater metaverse and there's multiple metaverses, right? You know how you have the greater Atlanta area, but then you have the city of Atlanta. So maybe it's something like that, where it's the greater metaverse and then there's, metaverses within. So I don't know. I mean, some people are very adamant that is the metaverse. It's one metaverse. Other people think it's multiple metaverses. So I think we're all kind of, in all honesty, we're all building it, and we're all building the lexicon as well that goes along with it.
Sure. To get to that point of one, going back to Ready Player One, and you have the Oasis.
Yeah.
We would need some epic platform in which everything else would get connected to, right? And then have the multiple metaverses sitting on top of some sort of architecture that allows all of that to thrive. Kind of a basics for the internet. It's going to be interesting. What are you seeing in that space, like from a technical aspect?
It's a challenge. I mean, because it's really easy for someone to envision it, but when you try to think about, millions or billions of people accessing data through a wearable, that in itself takes, I don't even think 5G, that's like 6G plus. So you'll need edge computing, you'll need cloud, you're going to need even 6G. You're going to need so many different things from an infrastructure perspective, we're just literally getting started. So, and the big challenge there also too is, right now, if you're going into any of these social virtual reality experiences, or even in games, you'll go in and there'll be instances where there's a set number of people that can participate, right?
Yes.
But eventually the idea is to have, everyone together in these shared virtual spaces. So thinking about, how many entities can you have in an instance, and how do you solve for that? Because that takes huge computing power. I think that there's multiple companies, the bigger tech players, but also some of the smaller startups that I've seen that are really trying to solve for that and figure out, how do you scale? How do you have more people and more entities in one instance?
How close are we getting to, so we see the cartoony stuff because games drives a lot of it. How close are we getting to photorealistic, or where it feels kind of like your experience being locked up in a room? Where are we at with that?
Well, I think we're closer than people think to kind of, holograms and holoportation. I'm very lucky that I get to, I wear many hats, and one of my hats is a VP at Avatar Dimension. We are the newest studio in the Microsoft mixed reality certified capture studio. So we do holograms in essence. It's volumetric video, but for all intents and purposes, people are going to understand the term hologram. So it's we're doing 3D performance capture. It's the closest thing you can get to a real human, right? We scan real people, we capture real people. So if you were to come into the studio, we would do a 3D performance capture, a hologram of you from top to bottom. So it's the closest you can get to yourself in a virtual way, in ones and zeros. That's what I tell people. And eventually in these metaverses, you're going to choose to be just like currently. You probably have Instagram Cathy is different than LinkedIn Cathy.
Oh, absolutely.
Right. So yeah. You're your persona in one platform, Instagram, TikTok, TikTok Cathy is going to be different than LinkedIn Cathy, that sort of thing. So same thing. I think that eventually you're going to go into this metaverse, and you're going to choose to be your more, realistic avatar self in the form of your hologram. Or you could choose to be, I said this the other day, you could choose to be a purple unicorn with with a horn on fire. So yeah, I mean, you're going to be able to kind of go between this kind of fluidity of who you want to be seen as. How do you represent yourself in these, in this metaverse and these virtual shared spaces? So
I have a friend that is going to like that unicorn comment. So I just want to say, you know who you are. So timeline, or what are we? So the hardware is starting to sell, and the use cases are becoming more prolific, both in business and in consumer end. More people, it seems, are paying attention. Mm-hmm. When do you think we're going to start getting some true market penetration?
I mean, everyone always asks that question, right? And I don't put a name or last name or on it, right? I don't say like it'll be January, blah, 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 right? What I would say is the next decade is a decade of a lot of invention and acceleration, because especially with wearables, having worked at Magic Leap, like you're putting a computer on your face. That's really hard to do. Yes. Right? That in essence is very hard to do. So I'm actually very eager to try the new spectacles from Snap. Yes. I've already heard some reviews, and obviously, it's a first gen AR device. It is great. But it's still, field of view is not necessarily there, but we'll get there, right? We'll eventually get there, but it is a very hard problem to solve. So I would say, within the next decade, probably, towards the, 2030s, we'll really have these more ubiquitous devices. It could be sooner, right? It all depends. I do think a big signal. So we got Snap coming to market with AR glasses. Facebook is coming to market with AR glasses this year, as they had announced. And, we're still waiting to figure out when Apple comes to market with something. Everyone knows they are working on it. But I think that when Apple does kind of launch their product or announce that they're launching their product, even if it's a first, a V1 of AR in some form, that'll be one of those moments where brands are going to be like, oh, we should have listened, we should have done this, we should have prepared. So I'm sure my phone's going to ring off the hook that day, but yeah.
How important is it for brands to start thinking about this now? I see this a lot, or I've seen it a lot within big data, and then AI and certain types of automation like RPA, where now it's blockchain, where the sooner that they crack their head against it and start figuring out use cases that fit their cultural DNA, the better off they are. Does that also apply to this?
I think so. I think it definitely applies to this. And this is why. Okay. So for example, the conversation tends to be dominated by artificial intelligence and artificial funding for artificial intelligence and how artificial intelligence will change their world. And yes, I completely agree with that. But in essence, how are we going to see that future? That future will be seen through these, devices, these wearables. And I really think that AR and VR from that perspective are going to impact how we engage with the physical world in a bigger way than artificial intelligence will, because we're going to see it. How are we going to see that future? It's going to be through these, wearables. So the way that, a regular consumer is going to engage with your brand is going to affect it. Yes, it's going to be affected by a artificial intelligence. It already is. But when it comes to actually how they're going to see it and how they're going to engage with it in their reality, that's going to be driven by AR and VR. So I think it's also important. I feel like sometimes AR and VR gets kind of, a different seat at the table, or it's like put in a different table. But no, it's about the convergence of all these technologies. And at the end of the day, these wearables, they're going to have, just like the impact that the phone had in our lives. Right? It's huge. The same thing. These wearables are going to be exactly that. So that's actually something I always kind of bring up when I'm having conversations with government. It's like, we're always trying to play catch up. The US government saying like, we need to catch up to electric vehicles. China's dominating, or you need to invest more in AI. And I'm like, I think that's all great. And I agree. But my goodness, we're already leading in AR and VR. The godmother of VR, the godfather of VR, the grandparent, the grandfather of VR, they're all American.
Mm.
Like it is created here and we're leading. And why aren't we focusing, why aren't we, dedicating more to that industry? So anyway, that's just kind of my perspective, because I feel like AR and VR tends to be the cousin relegated to a different table. And I'm like, no, it's going to have such a huge impact in how you see and how you, interact with the world around you.
So from that human perspective, both in terms of
Mhm.
obviously it's exciting, and we are visual creatures, as you mentioned, and then taking the rest of the senses and incorporating that, including haptic feedback. So now you have touch. We're adding in
Smell.
the audio, smell, and then linking that to your experience in that isolation. What are your hopes, or some of your hopes, that you see outside of, say, entertainment, for this technology and its impact on humanity?
I mean, medical, healthcare, training, you name it, education. I mean, it's everywhere. It really is everywhere. It's going to impact every single industry. So yeah, I mean, it's really an exciting time.
For those who haven't caught the vision yet, paint a couple pictures of what those use cases look like, so when they finish listening to this podcast, um, they'll they'll be able to tell that one good story. Give me, what's a fun story?
That's a fun story. Well, I'll give you kind of an example of use of holograms. People always think holograms and they think entertainment, right? But the studio that I work at, we actually have a sister studio in London called Dimension, and we kind of help process some of the assets. But basically, it was doing volumetric scans, volumetric video of doctors putting on PPE during the pandemic. So in that case, you need to be able to put your protective gear on correctly. You need to look at every angle, right? So with volumetric video, you were able to record video of someone putting that on, and people could watch it on their computers or on their phones and move that video around and zoom in and see, how are they doing this? How are they doing that? Right. So very powerful when it really matters, when lives can be saved, if something's put on correctly, you can actually use these technologies for that. So yeah.
Boom. All right. So on that note, how do people find you? Because the stuff that you post is absolutely incredible. So what are your active social channels and how do people connect with you?
Yeah, I would say LinkedIn is really where I share a lot of my thought leadership. And that's where, I don't know, I just have a lot of fun there. So
Great
LinkedIn,
platform.
Cathy Hackl. I'm Cathy Hackl across all social media platforms. LinkedIn and Twitter, I think, are my most active ones. So yeah, feel free to connect with me there. And I also have a book that just came out called The Augmented Workforce: How AR, AI, and 5G Will Impact Every Dollar You Make. So definitely check that out on Amazon.
And that'll be in the link in the description. Cathy, thank you so much. This was fascinating. Really appreciate your time. It was great meeting you.
You bet. Thank you. And I'll see you in the metaverse.
See you in the metaverse.